So as a follow-up to my previous video about tips for flicking, I thought I'd just share some gameplay that gives you an idea of what these flicks look like in practice. And I'll show some highlights. So what I spoke about in my flicking tips video was about understanding the range of motion for both your fingers and your wrist, so you know roughly how far you need to move your wrist or extend your fingers in order to flick to the target. But the same idea applies to your arm as well. So what I do is I'll put my arm in a neutral position, and then I'll aim down sights, and then if I move my arm to the extreme left, that moves my screen about 90 degrees either way. So I know that from a neutral position, if I were to move my forearm 100%, I would be able to flick onto a target 90 degrees from me. So what that means is I can then approximate how far I need to move my arm for the wider flick. So I know at a 45-degree angle, I only need to move my arm halfway to the left. Same for the right. So if there's a target maybe 30 degrees from me, I can kind of easily approximate that because I know it'll be just less than halfway. So I can quite intuitively just move my arm in that direction. And after you've practiced this for a couple of rounds, it will become intuitive, and you won't have to be conscious and think about how many degrees the target is relative to you. You'll just kind of instinctively know how far to move your arm and your wrist and how much pressure to use in your fingers. So just being mindful of the range of motion and the angle that the target is relative to you, just being conscious of that when you're practicing really helps with accuracy. And after you've practiced this for a while, it will just become intuitive, and you won't have to think about these details anymore, and you can get to a reasonable level of aiming moderately quickly. Now, this is my experience. It's not something that has been thoroughly discussed with other people, so your opinions may vary. There are obviously other ways to train your aim, but I like to have guidelines in my mind that just make things easier. So hopefully these tips could help somebody out who's experimenting with training their aim. If you're a Call of Duty player like me and you want to train your aim to improve your performance in the game, please let me know and I'll be more than happy to play with you. I'm on Discord, I'm on battle.net, so if you just send me a private message, I'll let you know my details and we can start instant messaging and maybe play some games together and just share our ideas and give each other tips. I think it's good to have other people to train your aim with, so please feel free to get in contact and we can train our aim together. Another way I think about my aiming is I imagine 3 zones on my screen. So the first zone is this circle here, which is the same area as my optic. So essentially any target in here I can comfortably flick to using my fingers. The second area is this kind of oval shape, and I create this using a combination of my fingers for vertical movement and my wrist for the horizontal movement. So anything in this area I can use combination of finger and wrist, and then anything outside of that I use my arm. So that's the kind of rule of thumb I use to know whether I should use my fingers, wrist or arm to aim at the target, and I find that makes things simpler. So one thing I practice in game is just being conscious of whether I'm using the correct part of my arm, wrist or fingers to aim at the target. And for vertical movement, the rule of thumb I use is that if the target is within this range, I'll use my fingers to flick onto them vertically, but if they're beyond that range, then I'll begin to use my shoulder for the vertical movement. When I say shoulder, I kind of mean arm, but I mean being careful to keep your arm kind of steady, relaxed, and just concentrate on pushing your shoulder forwards and backwards. And I find that if you focus on aiming vertically like that, it can improve accuracy. And of course that movement can be combined with wrist or your forearm, so at the elbow. You combine that kind of pushing of the shoulder with those other movements to get some kind of diagonal type movement. If you have any views on what I've said, whether you agree, disagree, or whether you have any advice for me to improve my technique, or you wish to share some information with others that may find helpful, please submit a comment. And I think it's really good to just create discussion and get people talking and sharing ideas, because each of us has our own ways of setting out guidelines just for making things simpler. And I might know some things that may help others, other people will know things that may help me. So it's just good to keep a dialogue, I think, among the community, and to be comfortable in sharing our views, whether they're correct or not. Because if I share my views on technique and they turn out to be suboptimal, well, somebody can let me know and then I can improve. So I think it's just good to be honest about where we are as aimers